When the NFT1 standard came out from Chia, one of the things that was repeated more often than anything else was that royalties would be baked in, enforced, and that this was going to be a big differentiator in the entire ecosystem. That at the time when royalties and all of this stuff was being discussed, there was actually quite a bit of response to other platforms, OpenSea, Rarible. And I remember that there was an article that came out where it was the vision for NFTs and how it was going to be different, and that royalties would always be paid out. It would be enforced by the blockchain. And I've got that document right here where it talks about how the NFT standard was to work. And that's not how it works. And we have with us Lucky Eight, who has demonstrated that royalties are at most a suggestion, filed a bug with Chia, and got a somewhat unsatisfying response from Chia. So we thought we'd dive into this in a bit more detail to give a little bit more context to just how big of a deal this was with, Ethereum when OpenSea decided that they were no longer going to enforce royalties. It's like when OpenSea first destroyed itself. It's when that platform stopped being the de facto platform for trading NFTs on Ethereum. And this was a huge controversy. It was a big deal. A lot of NFT creators view royalties as one of the only ways that their projects can continue to exist, as if they're traded and they're actually getting a piece of that. So if this doesn't work and it doesn't work on Chia, then it is a pretty big deal to many people who want NFTs to be a significant part of how blockchains can work and how artists can get paid and how projects can continue to find a source of revenue other than just continuously creating more and more and more NFTs. So I thought we'd dive into this in a bit more detail. Lucky Eight, welcome to the show. Could you maybe just start with how did you first get an inkling that royalties weren't working the way that you thought, and tell us a little bit more about how you demonstrated that royalties were not being enforced the way that you had anticipated?
Sure. Although I do have a background in cybersecurity, this wasn't a great research effort where I found a flaw through academic research or proofs of code or anything. I was working on a pretty complicated set of puzzles that interacted with the offer mod, the settlement layer that Chia refers into it in their internal source code as offer mod throughout their code, and settlement layer.clsp inside of their actual CLSP code. And specifically, what I had done, I was trading NFTs through a custom type of vault into an offer file, and I knew that trade prices list was a thing inside of the transfer puzzle that is standardized for NFT1 puzzles. It's NFT1 NFTs that support royalties, but I didn't exactly have the format in front of me, and I was trying to make a unit test for a complex flow and see it fail, and then I was going to go back and update the trade prices list and work out the details because I was expecting the announcements to fail. And the announcements in GLISP are the way that spins that are in the same block can assert things about themselves and about other spins. And that first time that test passed, I was like, woohoo, my test passed. And then I was like, wait, that test shouldn't pass. I haven't got back to the fix me I left in the code. So I poked around at it a lot. I read a lot of the source code, and I just couldn't work out how it was supposed to ever, in that kind of absolute sense suggested by some of the Chia blog posts and marketing efforts, guarantee royalties. And at that point, I started to write up a HackerOne detailed disclosure of it, including reproduction steps, reproduction code, the whole bit. And I spent, I don't know, probably 10 hours on that, and filed that, and basically got an immediate close, not a bug from Chia Network on that. And say this is functioning as by design. So I poked a lot of questions at that, and didn't find satisfactory answers. I escalated it to Gene, and got some deflection a little bit. The one common thing I keep seeing is every time I bring this up, NFT transfers get brought up, and then I'm like, whoa, we're not talking about NFT transfers. We're talking about NFT offers. And the kind of the party line that I've heard from anybody associated with CNI seems to be like, well, if you can have transfers, you can bypass royalties. Therefore, it doesn't matter if offers can bypass royalties. That's a little bit reductive of what they actually have said, but it seems to be pretty indicative of the overall temperature that they've displayed toward it. And I just want to bring proper community visibility into what the actual assumptions are that they can trust about NFT standards. The creator to individual collector sale, the first sale, is really very safe. After that, secondary sales get to be very very questionable. There's a set of caveats that you could guarantee to know whether royalties are being manipulated or not, but it's where the opportunities for collusion come up.
And when we see parts of the ecosystem, and I've got Mint Garden pulled up here where it talks about what the royalty is. So the royalty has always been a front and center part of how the community thought about NFTs, the way that the royalties were displayed, conceptualized, and utilized. And so really what you've been able to demonstrate is a malicious client, so a client that wanted to bypass these royalties, can just put in any trade price they want, and if they do that, then nothing gets paid to the original royalty address. Is that kind of it in a nutshell? That if you went and did some modifications to either the Chia software itself, which is all written in Python, so you can go in there and like change one file, or if you were to make your own client, then you'd be able to start trading your favorite NFTs, and it wouldn't pay out royalties to your friends and to the creators, whoever was listed in the NFT. And you actually demonstrated that one of these went through on Dexy, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So I got that one pulled up here. So this is the one that showed this actually occurring, where royalties didn't get paid out correctly.
Yeah, and I specifically, because I wanted to do this ethically and not take advantage of anything, I specifically took an NFT I had minted. The royalties were mine, and I traded them myself. So guess wash trading, I guess, but there was no fraudulent intent behind it.
Yeah, it's just to demonstrate the exploit, and so just so we're kind of giving everybody some of the background on how this works. So Chia has had these open platforms for people to find issues, right? It's, I think they're HackerOne now. They were using a previous platform before this, but essentially, if you go into HackerOne, you'll find that Chia lists itself as an entity that will pay some amount if you are able to find a problem in the software and it's deemed to be a security issue. And if it's a security issue, then through HackerOne, they will give you a bug bounty. So for instance, the other day when the chain had a full stoppage, like it wouldn't make blocks, like if the individual Drago Pensulo had found that on his own, had reported it through HackerOne, saying, hey, I know how to stop the chain, I know how this thing can actually blow up, if he had filed that and showed how to do it, then he could have collected a bounty. So you went to HackerOne and you filed the appropriate stuff, and they immediately said, this is not a bug that we're going to pay a bounty for. And furthermore, we're just going to straight close this because we don't even view this as an issue. We knew about it. It was part of the design. Like, we had an internal discussion about it. We knew it was there the whole time. And therefore, this just gets closed. No disclosure, no payout to you. This is not a security issue. Go on your merry way. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
I think that's definitely a fair characterization of it. And that was troubling to me on multiple levels. One, from the perspective of the users of the software, it is a security issue. And when they acknowledged that they knew about the limitation, uh, that put them in a place, from my perspective, of willfully misrepresenting the capabilities of it inside of their marketing materials.
Right, because if we go back to the way that these things were discussed, and this one's really the canonical one, because at the time, the person who was championing the NFTs, that was Fishcent. He was the guy who sort of was out there beating the drum of NFTs and saying, this is why NFTs are going to be so better and different. We're going to have provenance, we're going to have royalties, we're going to have a lot of stuff that has been lacking. So everything that was missing from the NFT world, that everything that was happening on Ethereum, Chia was going to do it better. And royalties were definitely front and center on that. It was, if you look at the documentation, they said, this is how Ethereum got it wrong, and we're going to do better at it. We're going to have a true marketplace independence, consistent provenance, permanence. All of these things were going to be, the reason why Chia NFTs were better. And so it's very surprising to hear that the team internally had discussions about how flawed the royalty implementation actually was, and that they knew that this was the case, and that they didn't even view it as something that they needed to put extra effort into. It was like, no, we're actually making a conscious choice that this could easily be circumvented, that you demonstrated it. And I don't necessarily mean easily in the fact that it's not technically challenging to do this, but rather this isn't something that required you to do something far outside the ordinary. Sometimes when there's a flaw, you need to do something like smashing the stack, or create a buffer overflow to actually make something happen, because you're exploiting a flaw that exists. And to some extent, the flaw that was in the Cat 1 standard was like that. By errantly smashing some stuff together, you could actually get the puzzle to do something it wasn't supposed to do. In this case, you just tell it the wrong stuff, and it just blindly goes about its day saying, oh yeah, no problem, trade price is 0, good to go.
Yeah, and I would say I do agree that this blog post you have up kind of hints at it. I think the 140 release blog uses even stronger language. The one that came out around either late June or early July makes even more explicit language around the royalties. And I really can't reconcile what I read in that blog with what I encountered and the blowback I've seen since.
Lucky, you said that part of the reasoning behind um, the decision that was made at CNI not to address this issue was something to do with transfers versus offers. Can you what what are they talking about there, and what's going on, if you can get into the detail of why is that a problem whenever it comes to uh, turning off this or I mean actually restricting someone from being able to lie on the whatever, misrepresent the announcement as with regards to what the royalty actually is.
Could you break that down little bit differently for me? Question.
So, well, to begin with, you said part of the reasoning behind leaving this in had something to do with transfers versus offers with NFTs, the retaining the ability to transfer an NFT to yourself. I don't understand why this is an issue, because to me, if the way that I think about it, and again, I'm not a developer, I don't understand the Chia Lisp code, but if I wanted to transfer an NFT to myself or to somebody that I knew, I would put the price at 0, and the royalty would be 0, and it would. So I don't understand why the reasoning is that they need to preserve the ability for users to transfer NFTs into their own wallets or into their own DIDs if they want to move them around.
I didn't interpret the situation quite the way you're explaining it. I interpreted it as they were saying, because you could transfer, you could bypass any offers of royalties anyway, and there was no protection. Even in the early days of OG Chia NFTs, I always had people in my DMs trying to get me to do the "Trust Me, Bro" transfers with them. I did a few of them because some of the people I interacted with had got airdrops or whatever, and seemingly weren't very sophisticated, didn't have very sophisticated wallets in a lot of cases. It's the early days of wallet feature support. In some cases, I actually looked up the royalty address from the NFT puzzle hash and sent a manual payment to it. So it's always been something that, like, I've not felt great about. But that Trust Me Bro transfer happens in every NFT ecosystem when there's money involved. You know, a lot of, to be blunt, a lot of the Chia NFTs have been perceived as essentially worthless throughout their life. There have been a few projects that have come and gone. There have been a couple, like Chia Friends, that have hung around and endured, but the financial motivations for those kind of things haven't really been there. But I don't think that Chia was saying so much that you couldn't have transfers and better offers, so much as they were saying, since you can't have transfers, somebody can always bypass offers. That was how I've interpreted it, which just seems like a logical short circuit that I'm not sure how they can justify with themselves.
When you actually started experimenting with the code, did you come up with any kind of a way that it could have been done in the way that you think it should work? Like, if the Chia community decided that the NFT1 standard was too fundamentally flawed and wanted to start pursuing, like, let's say the team at Monkey Zoo said, we actually want royalties guaranteed. Like, we have a show called Royalties Guaranteed. We always thought this was how it was going to work. I guess we have need for an NFT2 standard. Did you see a way to fix it, or is it that would be more sophisticated Chia Lisp than what you're capable of producing to actually make it work correctly?
I definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it, and there's some promising areas, and there are some things that are obviously bad routes to go down.
Because it seems to me that when you have something like this, where the amount of coin that's being transferred and some kind of an offer, a swap, making an announcement about what's actually being traded and being able to verify that, it seems at first blush like it would be possible, like, to say there's a way to do this and there's a way to make it so that the NFT can fundamentally only be transferred in this particular way, and to say, if you want it to be on your DID, then you got to buy it that way. You got to transfer it that way initially, not try to do this two-hop thing. And in the world of increased fees, you probably would never want to two-hop it anyway. And I think that part of what they were saying is, you might be transferring it from a cold wallet to a hot wallet and some of these other things. Like, to me, that seems like kind of shaky stuff. Like, I'm not sure that those are the best use cases or even the best rationales for any of why the puzzle is fundamentally as flawed as it is. Because I saw some of the back and forth that you had with the team at Chia saying, well, these are the reasons why we did it the way we did it. I think that that's the kind of stuff that, had it been more in front of the Chia community, that these internal discussions were happening, that everybody would have weighed in and said, we don't really think that that's the best way to solve this problem. It was definitely a backroom discussion that wasn't had in front of us. And so when they presented the marketing materials and said, royalties are going to be enforced, this is all going to work the way that you think, and then it turns out that they actually had these discussions, they weren't going to work this way, and that a sufficiently motivated client could circumvent all of this, that seems antithetical to the way that this was all presented. So I'm dubious that there is no way to solve this concretely, and I almost wonder if this is something that can be solved with a more sophisticated set of Chia Lisp that does better announcements, that actually checks some of these things and enforces it as part of the part of the Chia Lisp. I suspect that it's possible, and that the reasons that they gave are just not really what the community would have preferred.
Yeah, I would say trade prices list in the context of offers only makes sense if there's cross validation between those data points. That's the trade prices list is self-declared in the transfer program in the NFT. If you're doing a regular transfer, you would omit it because you're transferring it. But if you're doing an offer, those values should inherently be reconciled with the offer context it's executing in. And I actually have spent quite a bit of time looking at what can and can't allow for that to happen. And there are corner cases all over, like other spins in the blocks that create announcement cycles with that spin. So you could have the amount that you say you're transferring it for, and then you could create a payment off to the side and have your offer and that payment assert each other and guarantee that payment in the same block. One way that you actually could solve this that I'm pretty confident would work is if you created a 2 transaction block delay in between, basically accepting an offer on chain and absorbing the value in the NFT from the offer. Because you could create a puzzle that completely ignored the outside context. It only looked at the values it had access to, and lock that value, lock both the value and the NFT for one more transaction block, and then allow final claiming of that offer after the opportunity to defraud has passed. That would work. There's some clunky user facing this to that would have to be solved. I mean, it could be a global observer that just went through and kicked those. That's how I've always referred to my anyone can spin puzzles I created for splitxch.com. It's like I don't really have any power over your coins other than when I see them there, I can kick them. When I kick them, they go to the right place.
Well, I also wonder if there couldn't be something more like an AMM that would enforce this. You know how we have singleton fast forward spends. If like we could have some gatekeepers that might be able to enforce that these transfers are happening the way that they're supposed to by having some sort of a pseudo escrow entity that is a singleton that exists on chain. And if you said, well, there's an opportunity that there's not going to be enough throughput. Well, you could have some group of them or whatever. I just feel like this is a solvable problem. I mean, we back when we were creating this style of NFT, I think the Chia Lisp was far less sophisticated. We forked in a whole bunch of new operators. We've done a whole bunch of things. Even if the Chia Lisp is currently insufficient for doing this, okay, well, we've been forking in all kinds of new stuff. If something's needed, then we ought to bring it in and make this work the way it's supposed to. I 100% agree with you. This seems to be a flaw in the standard. And if we're going to rev puzzles like we did for Cat 1, because it doesn't fundamentally work the way it's supposed to, and it's easily circumvented, then it seems like this meets that same standard, because Cat 1 didn't work the way it was supposed to, and it was easy to make it do something it wasn't supposed to, and you didn't have to do something like do a buffer overflow. You just had to do very specific things, and that's all you've done here. You've just passed arguments into the Chia Lisp, and you've told it uh, to do something, and it did it, and there's a problem with it. And I feel like this is really no different than what happened with Cat 1.
I absolutely agree.
So Lucas, do you recall that? How familiar are you with like Cat 1? Should we dig into that just a bit to give better context on this?
Absolutely, if you would, because I remember the introduction of the Cat 2 standard, but I didn't know the Cat 1, and I was still wading into the waters of Chia at that point.
So when cats were first introduced, they weren't even called Cat 1. They were just called Cat. It was just Chia asset token. And what ended up happening was there was a very specific way that you could manipulate a cat spend, such that when it was calculating the coin, if you were to not give it the correct amount of characters for some of the input fields, because what it would do is it would calculate the coin ID by smashing different pieces of data together. And so if you gave it the wrong lengths, you could actually make it seem like you were doing a transfer that was not what was intended. And so that flaw meant that you could spend coins that you didn't really have, and it just accepted it. And that was a big problem, because if you were going to have some real, monetary value, which at the time we had a coin that was representing US dollars. We had stably. And so this was a big problem, because now you had something where you could actually essentially create dollars and then go redeem it from stably, and you'd be able to get real money out of the system. So it was a big problem, and it was something where the Chia Lisp would just accept what you told it, and it would calculate the coin ID, and it wouldn't check the lengths. And because it wasn't checking the lengths correctly, it wasn't calculating coin IDs according to the correct rules. And so when they fixed it, they essentially went out there and they found all the coins that were currently, had an offer out there for them, and they exploited the flaw, and then they fixed Cat 2 to have the correct thing. And so they just fixed it all en masse, and it was kind of a big deal. It was crazy, because CNI just stepped in and tried to correct the problem. And then everybody that had cats had to reissue them as Cat 2s. And they introduced a tool and did all kinds of stuff. And so essentially they said there was a flaw in it. It would allow you to do something you weren't supposed to do. And they viewed it as a big enough problem that they invested a significant amount of time correcting it. I think if NFTs were hotter, if they were more important on Chia, and I think Lucky 8 sort of pointed this out, that there aren't a lot of collections that are really that high of value, and that this isn't something that's very prevalent in the Chia ecosystem right now. I mean, it was certainly something that was hot and exciting for a period of time, but as the whole NFT ecosystem has cooled down on Ethereum and in the broader market, Chia's kind of followed that trend. And so maybe this is something where, because it's not that big of a topic, they're not fixing it in the way that they had to fix Cat, when it was something that had a real monetary impact with Stably, and the way that they were issuing a stable coin on Chia.
Well, I think this would definitely have a real monetary impact, because hand in hand with the NFT, or the non-fungible concept of a token, is this prevalent idea in Web3 that creators were going to retain some association, to retain a royalty from it. And if that goes, then why? I mean, not why have NFTs, but there's going to be a lot of people who are not interested in doing anything creative with them. So, Lucky 8.
I certainly think that there were a lot of people who were even attracted to the Chia ecosystem because of this one feature. You know, that there was definitely fear around the fact that OpenSea wasn't going to do it. You know, the entire drive to try to get people to come to Chia to be a creator and to issue their NFT collections here, I think had a lot to do with royalties. So I think you're right that there is a real monetary impact to people who have invested time, money, and energy creating NFTs on this chain, specifically because they thought royalties were going to be enforced on chain.
I got to, I mean, I'm sure we all here have gotten to experience Rusty, especially OpenSea and ETH, also Magic Eden on Solana. One of the things that most excited me, and I recall hearing you know, when Chia was introduced to me, the royalties being baked into it was something that was put forth to the Solana community that I was hanging out with at the time. I know, judge me. But so I mean, but going forward from that, when we talk about a possibility of a NFT2 standard or what that might look like, another offer standard, I don't know what the fix would be, but you know, in Monkey Zoo's room on Sunday, Josh Painter talked about, like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be all or none with regards to the way going forward. And I would think that at least part of the projected development on Chia would be creating something that did have the royalties truly like locked in and unavoidable to the best of our knowledge as to what could happen. Because okay, fine, if there is some sort of argument that it's possible with transfers, why not build the two and see who opts to use which? I have an idea that people would be much more interested in the baked in royalties.
I agree. And when I had mentioned earlier that the 140 blog talked a lot about this, I'm looking at the specific section where they announced the Chia Friends, and they said it's a fun, free way to engage with Chia NFTs and discover the power of decentralized, zero counterparty risk trading, which Chia offers. It also demonstrates an important differentiator of Chia NFTs, on-chain royalties paid out to the NFT creator with every Chia Offer trade. There's a lot of strong language in that very short blip from that article. And yeah, I think that's the vision that a lot of people came and believed in. And I agree. Monkey Zoo, with his royalties guaranteed weekly space, and a lot of other community members and pitching people from other communities totally latched onto that because there's perceived value there. I took the knowledge of these royalties and worked to create the first royalty splitting puzzle on Chia that was kind of configurable, and worked with AceVale on chip 0008 to get those kind of standardized together. And then I built splitxch.com around this idea that even if it's just pennies today or a couple of $100 a year, which is kind of how it's been looking, over time with these permanent royalties, it might accumulate to something. And I made a big effort of time and volunteer work to make those kind of things to the community because of that backdrop of royalties guaranteed.
And I think that is a very important point that you bring up, that it may not seem like it's a lot of money right away, but I believe, when it personally comes to myself that the smaller a project is, the more important the royalties actually become, because every project has expenses just to keep it running and to keep things flowing. And a lot of people, when they put time and effort into a project, there's got to be some reason to do it. A lot of people out there in the NFT space aren't just creating these projects so that they can better the community and better everybody else. And when you look at it, it's more of like the opposite. There's a lot of scams out there going around. So to find an actual true NFT community and project that wants to work and build for a long-term period, it's going to need royalties to work that into effect. And I would think that, as an NFT project became bigger and more productive, the royalties could decrease on it. It wouldn't make that big of a difference. But when you're starting out, when you're just a new NFT project, the royalties make a huge difference. And I could see that as definitely being a selling point of wanting to move to Chia, because like Lucas and Grant said, I've had to deal with royalties being taken off of OpenSea and having to go through new contracts and NFTs. And it's just a huge headache to go around that. So I would really applaud you taking the effort to kind of expose the truth that's going on with these royalties.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Well, I think it's an interesting first part of this discussion. So I know that you had a chance to talk with the Monkey Zoo team recently. Furthering this conversation here on FOMO, I think is an important next step. If in response to this, we start to hear from various developers within the community, this isn't possible to fix it. I think that then what we need from CNI is that this language was intended not to be conveying what it's conveying. I think at minimum, I'd like to hear a blog post from CNI saying, this is a clarification about what royalties were supposed to be. That I think would be an appropriate response. What I would prefer is that if there are Chia list developers out there who take a look at what you've done here, the demonstration of how royalties can actually be circumvented, could take a look at this and say, it would be possible if we did it this way, or if we had some operator or some upgrade to Chia list, which we currently don't have. I think that discussion is a healthy one for a blockchain, because if there is a major feature that is something that was drawing attention to the chain, that was drawing creators to the chain, and that has now been pointed out to have a fundamental flaw in it, that if it can be fixed, let's start having the discussion about how it can be fixed, because we have very sophisticated Chia Lisp developers that are out there. I'm thinking about Yak, I'm thinking about Trepka, I'm thinking about Ken, the people who have a really strong grasp around what is possible in Chia Lisp. And if any of them could come out, or just as a response to this, say, here's why what you're thinking really isn't fundamentally possible at all. That means that this is never possible on Chia, which has a Turing complete smart contract language, which has what has been argued to be the strongest, most capable programming language on chain that's ever been created. And if it isn't possible on Chia because it's fundamentally impossible, then this is not possible at all. Like, it's got to be one of the two. And so if we can fix it, then I'd say it's time, to look at this and say, maybe there's some minor modifications that can be made, and we could have an NFT2 standard. And if not, and it's not fundamentally possible, then the world doesn't have something that it fundamentally wanted, and NFTs with royalties is not possible. I do not believe the latter at all. I do not believe that that is the case. There is a way that this can work. It just requires sufficient motivation to do so. And like, there must have been a camp internally at CNI that argued against this, because if there was an internal debate, which someone said that there was, and I don't know if we want to say that yet, but like, in looking through some of the documentation you supplied to us, Lucky, there was a debate about this. And I firmly believe that there were people who are on the side of, we should make this work right. And if they said we should make this work right, I hope that they had some vision for how this could be made right, and it could have been done right. And that discussion next time, maybe we could have it out in the open instead of an internal decision that was made at CNI, and then we ratified a standard that we really didn't get enough chance to weigh in on.
Yep. Can I make one other comment about that, Grant?
Yeah, for sure.
So not only is there was that discussion not had out in the public, but when you bring in information to Chia in the form of their standards process, they don't hesitate at all to basically stomp on the things that come into them. I actually wrote up an informational chip and supplied it to them as a PR yesterday that I suggested at least giving the status of everything to all of the community, so, get everybody on the same page. And I don't know, it's probably 15 minutes after I submitted it that JDE, Justin England, jumped on it and said, "This is absolutely not a security issue. You're causing problems by calling it a security issue, and stop calling it a security issue." And at that point, I closed the pull request to withdraw the chip. There is not an even footing here at all between the community and CNI. They think they're the masters, and we need to show them that they're wrong.
Well, and I would go so far as to say this: in the current incarnation, there are the mostly what's being used for NFTs is like pictures. Okay, fine, but they still have value. The creator, is potentially conveying rights with them, and that's part of what was in the standard, is that there could be rights associated with it, and those rights, if they were supposed to be conveyed with a royalty, that is a legal situation, and it is absolutely a security problem if a legal contract with legal rights are being conveyed, because royalties are supposed to be enforced, and that fundamentally is busted. Like I would agree with you. This is a security issue. It is not something that you can say is not a security issue, because if you're going to classify things only as security issues that are chain stoppage or whatever, then I think that's under-speccing what is in the world of what the rest of the community would consider to be a security flaw, especially in what has been, adopted as the standard for NFTs. If the royalties fundamentally don't work, I think that at least the documentation needs to be updated, that this is only guidance, that these are not enforced on chain, and some of this stuff should be, heavily revised and redocumented to reflect the current state of the world, that it really doesn't work the way everybody was told.
Go ahead, Lucky. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I completely agree.
And I too. And at the very least, I would see this as a security issue. At worst, a publicity issue. So I think it would seem to me the path forward would be to address the security issue. You can change the code to match what has been claimed about this. We should be aspiring to achieve that idea and that ideal. And many members of the Chia community believe in on-chain royalties and baked into the chain. That's something that I've heard repeatedly, baked into the chain. So, Lucky 8, thanks for coming on. We're over 40 minutes, and we try to keep it succinct in here. Thanks for coming on and telling us about what you discovered. You mentioned also that you had a platform for splitting royalties. Could you give us a quick summary of that, and maybe we'll have you on for a longer discussion about that in the future?
Sure. So Chip 8 that Acevale put together, he originally submitted it with a Chia list puzzle that he had created, and I guess he didn't realize that I had one. I'd already discovered some of the limitations of his, so we kind of collaborated together and came up with a kind of a new revised one to go forward with the standard. And I also provided the drivers to the community to be able to use that one. Someone suggested that it would be helpful to be able to do this self-service. So I created splitxch.com. You can break down your 100% of your royalties with a donation of 1.5% to the platform. And basically, you set the resulting address as your NFT royalty address, and from then on, it's like a lightweight secure the bag that those royalties get written to a puzzle that can only be distributed to those recipients according to those proportions. And my backend servers look for instances of those coins and just say basically spend my kick process, and it just kicks them out. And it's basically just a trigger. It activates them, but as long as they've been committed to that address, they can only ever go to the resulting recipients perpetually for all time. So that's splitxch.com in a nutshell.
All right. Well, hopefully we get to do a follow-up to this show where we hear the response from the community. If somebody wants to come on here and tell us fundamentally why royalties can't work the way that everybody thought they were working, we'd love to hear about it. So yeah, like looking forward to the discussion, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.